Let's talk about sex, baby! Or should I say, let's get you talking about sex with women on dates. You know, even when I was terrible with women growing up, I was still always really fascinated by the idea of romance and intimacy and understanding human sexuality. So when I used to go to parties and we were all sitting around talking at some point, inevitably either myself or somebody would bring up the conversation around these subjects, around past dating experiences or sex or anything of that nature. And even though I wasn't great with flirting with women, I was more comfortable talking about these things almost from like a clinical side. And without even trying, something magical would often happen, where women would suddenly start to show me interest and start to be a lot more forward with me, even though I really wasn't flirting with them or I didn't have any game. And what I started to understand is the fact that I could openly talk about these subjects helped women feel comfortable stepping into their sexuality and talking about them with me. And then coincidentally, them talking to a man so casually about these subjects started to make them feel aroused in the moment and connect to their own sexuality, and then imagine me as a potential intimate prospect. And then without even trying, I was able to date some women early on in my life by just being able to talk about normal sexual human experiences. I'm Nick Notas, and today I want to teach you how to bring up these intimate conversations on dates so women can start to connect to their own sexuality and see you as a romantic prospect. And that all begins with asking the right questions. You have to be willing to start asking these questions around intimacy if you want a woman to start opening up and sharing her sexual side with you. The best time to start talking about these things is a little while into a first date where you've kind of gone through the motions of small talk and getting to know each other, or on a second or third date where you guys are warming up to each other, maybe you flirted a little bit, and you just want to kind of push that connection forward. Now, when I suggest this to men, they often feel like it's so hard to bring up topics around romance or dating or human sexuality just out of the blue. And so they feel like they need a perfect segue into conversation so it feels natural. And I first want to assure you that you don't. Lots of times when you get past small talk on a date, maybe you're hanging out on a first or second date and you're an hour in, 2 hours in, and then you guys start asking each other more deep questions, you don't really need context anymore. It doesn't always need to connect the dots. You sometimes just say, hey, so I'm curious, tell me a little bit about your family life growing up. Now, if naturally you guys are already on subjects that are related to these things, so maybe you're talking about romance movies or past exes or dates or your online dating experience or 50 Shades of Grey and romance novels, then of course it's a nice, easy, natural progression to just be like, hey, by the way, if you read a lot in romance novels, are you very much a hopeless romantic? Or do you consider yourself really in touch with your intimate side? So that's always a given. But again, I don't think you always need that context. You can just create context yourself. So let me give you a few examples of how you could just lead into these subjects just by pulling context out of thin air. So you can just start by saying something like, okay, so now that we've kind of done the small talk thing, I want to get to know the real you. Or let me ask you something personal. Or so tell me the truth. And even tell me something fun about yourself. And if she says, yeah, of course, then from there you just roll into your first more sexual question. Now, of course, you don't want to go in guns blazing and ask the most personal sexual question ever. You have to be tactful about it. So what I want to talk about is kind of 3 different stages of intimate questions, going from lighter type questions where it's going to be easier for somebody to talk about to more intimate or heavy-handed questions that'll require a little bit more trust where you guys have talked about other intimate subjects beforehand. So let me give you some lighter questions to begin with. What are 3 things you find attractive in a man? When was your first kiss? How comfortable are you with public displays of affection? What do you think you look sexiest in? All these questions are not really friendly. They're signaling that you want to start talking in a more romantic way, but they're not so hard to answer that most women are going to feel pretty comfortable talking about these things, even on an early date. And it's just a doorway to getting closer and more intimate over time. Now, if she's openly talking about them and you're sharing yourself there, then you can start to move into more medium kind of intimate level questions. And we'll talk about how you can judge whether or not you should continue or not in a moment. But just overall, you want to progress from, again, less intimate questions to more intimate questions over time. Medium level questions. How do you flirt with a guy when you want to show him you're interested? How important is a passionate sexual connection to you in a relationship? How long do you think you could go without sex? And would you ever hook up with someone on a first date if the connection was strong enough? And these are a little bit more personal and intimate, where if a woman's starting to talk about these things openly with you and start to dive in, you can basically start to be sure that she's feeling it as well, and she's exploring her sexuality together. And the more intimate the questioning and dialogue, the more likely both of you are to get turned on in the moment. And finally is high-level intimacy of questions, like what's the craziest place you've had sex? Or what's something that secretly turns you on? Do you think porn is always harmful, or can it open up a person or a couple's sexuality? And even, what's your most embarrassing or awkward sexual experience? Now, I just want to state that these aren't perfect gradations of low to high level intimacy. It's a little bit of a feeling. Some people will be more comfortable with certain subjects than others, but in general, you can assume if you're asking a woman, like, what does she like about a guy? It's pretty safe. If you ask her about detailed sexual experiences, it's much more personal. I also want to clarify that you don't need to always hit very high level intimacy of questions before things can move forward. If a woman's more open to talking about even like low or medium level intimate things with you, it's often enough to start going for a kiss or moving things forward romantically. If you guys talk about much more personal things than that, it can be a lot of fun and things heat up, but you don't absolutely need it. And if you need more examples, I'll leave them in the description below. Otherwise, Google a phrase like sexual questions to ask a girl, and you'll usually find tons of sites with plenty of examples. Now, I'm sure the final question you have is, what if she doesn't respond well to these, or she seems a little standoffish or uncomfortable? Well, what you have to understand is that a woman not immediately answering these things or having a difficult time doesn't always mean that she's opposed to it. It just can be a lot of anxiety or even shame for a lot of deeper reasons, but deep down, almost all of us want to connect to that intimacy. So I think the worst thing you can do in that moment is start to feel really shameful yourself, or start like profusely apologizing, because you're only reinforcing this is something that's wrong or bad and we should never explore this together. Instead, I want to give you 3 quick techniques that'll help her maybe feel a little bit more comfortable and reinforce that this is okay and healthy, and make it more likely that you two can open up and talk about these subjects together. So let's imagine you asked her about how important an intimate connection is to her in a relationship, and she's like, why do you want to know? Okay, then I think you should own your question and say, well, because it's really fascinating to me, and I think it's super important in a long-term connection with someone. Or because it's kind of fun to talk about, and I kind of want to hear that side of you. Maybe she challenges you and kind of teasingly says, did you really just ask that? I'd look her in the eyes and say, damn right I did. The second technique you could use is to encourage her to open up. So maybe she's a little hesitant and she says, well, why do you want to know this? Or do you really want to know? And that's where I would say, like, definitely, I'm really interested in getting to know you, and I think that's a really fascinating side of people. You can say, I'm genuinely interested because it's really important to me. Or, hey, no stress at all, but I'm genuinely curious and I promise I'm not here to judge. And the third technique is that you could encourage her to open up by opening up first yourself. So whatever you ask, you should be able to open up and relate to that as well. So maybe you asked her, like, how long could you go without sex? And she had a hard time answering. And you could tell her, well, you know, for me, especially if I'm in a relationship, I kind of love being intimate and love exploring that with the partner. So having sex a couple of times a week is important to me. All these techniques are not meant to pressure or convince somebody to be sexual with you. In fact, it's the opposite. You are showing her that you are genuinely excited about sex, you have a healthy view on it, you're not judgmental about it, you're willing to step into that yourself and be vulnerable. And that's the best way that you're going to help someone else drop their guard and feel like they can reveal that really personal side of themselves to you. So overall, if you start asking a few of these questions and testing the water, and she seems really excited about it and open, then you can keep going. And you could talk about sex and intimacy for a while on a date. Sometimes it happens. If she seems apprehensive, or you're trying to encourage her to open up, and maybe she answers a few, but it's really difficult for her, then that's fine. You just talk about this a couple of times, and then you move back to normal conversation. But as long as you're bridging that gap a little bit, that, hey, I want to be intimate with you and I want to start to explore this, that's the key point. And if you're trying to talk about it and encourage her to open up and she still doesn't want to really talk about this on a date, cool, then you just drop it, you move back into other subjects, and maybe you try again later if you have a future date. We're all mammals and we all have that lustful animal inside us. It's up to you to unlock the sexual beast within her. And if you want to unlock more powerful mindsets and skills for dating, hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, and give this video a thumbs up.